Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was an immortal avatar. Immortality is a funny thing, some might think it a gift from the gods themselves. Wouldn't it be wonderful to live forever? To never age? Never die? Would not one call that a blessing? More like a curse. I've died so many times now I've lost count, and yet I keep coming back, with everything intact. Yes, my life is cursed, and yet, I enjoy it. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 8, Oath of Flame. Never again. There is a reason I don't enjoy traveling to the spirit world, as it turns out, I'm not entirely welcome there. I've even gotten trapped in spirit form once or twice before. Not a pleasant thing. I don't know why it seems to happen, only that it does. Perhaps I've upset the natural balance, the order, somehow by being reborn so many times. Perhaps the spirits regard me as an abomination for my inability to truly stay dead. Perhaps I'm just not a very sociable person. It could be any number of things. Who knows? Anywho, I managed to get the boys back in record time, too. And Aang managed to calm Heibai down. One Mokuton jutsu later and the woods were as good as new. This time with no crazy fire lady to burn them down around my ears, thank you very much. Which brings me to this next entry in my diary. Azula. Not quite sure what to do with her. But I just couldn't leave her alone. She's got nothing now, you know? I'm really bringing her with us on a whim, with only her word that she won't betray us at the first opportunity. I think it would be remiss of me to ignore her, though. I too know what it is like to have lost everything. But as fate would have it, we're not done yet. Haru might have decided to stay here and help the villagers protect their new forest, but an avatar's work is never done. Apparently one of Aang's past lives needs him to reach a temple before the solstice. Tomorrow. Not much of a problem when you can fly, right? Wrong. Did I mention this temple was in the Fire Nation? No. Because it's. That's right. The Fire Nation. The one who wants us dead. Yeah. That one. Man, this had better not come back to bite me in the ass. Whatcha reading? Eep. Azula gave a very unladylike squeak as Naruto's head popped up over her shoulder and took up residence there, an arm curling around her waist, to draw her close. She froze, transfixed as his body pressed up against hers, those rimmed blue eyes holding her, rooting her in place. She almost didn't notice it when he calmly reached around her with the other hand and plucked his diary from her grasp. She didn't even have the gall to resist, not with the business end of a kunai sticking threateningly between her ribs. It was like being a powerless child all over again, forced to obey as he stood over her in the moonlight. Her only solace was that the others had since fallen asleep, leaving her to suffer this indignity alone. Well, not entirely alone. It's not nice to steal, Azula. He purred, his lips brushing the outer lobe of her ear in passing. I just might have to punish you for this. Was it wrong for her to be more aroused than she had ever been around him? The spike of fear and threat of pain had her readying a fireball, but only for the first fraction of a second. It gradually passed when that bemused voice ingrained in her heart started to laugh, his mirth flowing like dark velvet through her ears, instantly tuning her into the identity of her attacker, and sending her fantasies into hyperdrive. Pain, by itself, was not something she feared, it was the pain of humiliation so readily inflicted by the bedeviled blonde that sent her heart rate skyrocketing. Once again, her visage outshone Susan's comet. That is. And now that I've stolen this back, he gave the book a wag before returning it to his pocket. I think it's time we set some ground rules, you and I. You may be traveling with us now, but I need to know that you won't strike at me the moment I turn my back. Or Aang's, for that matter. She paled at that insinuation. I said I wouldn't. You may say that to me now, Naruto shot back with a stern scowl, his sapphire eyes searching her saffron scathingly. But, what if things were different? What if your father offered you amnesty? What if he suddenly decides to, say, welcome you back with open arms? When she opened her mouth to rebuke the likelihoods of such a thing, he cut her off with an angry grunt. And all you had to do was put a dagger in my back while I was asleep? Are you saying you wouldn't even consider it? Azula tried to turn her head away, but Naruto's hand was suddenly there, forcing her gaze back to him. Don't try and lie to me. You would be tempted. And I wouldn't blame you. Power can be a seductive lure. My best friend once fell to it before my very eyes. No, before we go any further, I'm going to have you take the oath. Oath? Something deep within the princess quailed at that word. She didn't like the sound of it. It's something a Kage took in service to his or her feudal lord, in Konoha, and beyond his smile was genial, but the words within hinted at something more. Ah. You look confused, my dear. Have I said something to upset you? Azula gapwetted him there, blinking rapidly. At length, she smoothed the wrinkles in her gown and composed herself enough to speak. I've never heard of Konoha, she said. I'd be surprised if you had. Naruto sounded 1,000 years older just then, wiser beyond the teenage shell with whom she spoke. No, he continued with a shake of the head, Konoha doesn't exist in any of these 4 nations that you call home. Nor, for that matter, do I hail from any of them in these parts. To be precise, at her puzzled frown he continued, I come from a land beyond the horizon. That's not possible. There is no land beyond our own. You make it sound as if there's an entire continent. Absurd. The reply was out of her mouth and into the night, before she could think to take it back. But instead of an angry rebuke, she only received a sly smile. Naruto reached forward, flicking her on the forehead. Ow. Is that what they teach young'uns these days? He reprimanded her light. Tell me then, if I'm not from beyond the sea, then where do you think I'm from? I'm too restless to be from the water tribe, and as you can see, I don't exactly share the fashion sense of their people. I can't be from the air nomads, Aang's the last of them. I could be from the earth kingdoms given my complexion, but what would I be doing this far west? And I'm certainly not from the Fire Nation, as you can already see. If I was, I'd have you bent over my knee for addressing me like that. It was a fair sight to watch her cheeks color like that, he thought. Well worth revealing his past, at any rate. I forget you're not familiar with my country. Naruto chuckled, and for a moment, just a moment, his eyes lit with warmth. Then were cold again, like the stones at their feet. Let me give you a brief explanation of my world, just to whet your appetite. A feudal lord rules a country. But what ruler can control his kingdom without an army? The shinobi were that army, in a sense. Oh, the feudal lord may have had his samurai, but it was we who did the dirty work those honorable warriors wouldn't dare sully their hands with. Seduction. Assassination. Poisoning. Bombings. His tone rose with each word until they were almost thick with emotions, his eyes turning inward and distant as he pressed on. It as if he were there, she thought, recalling the days of a distant summer. Azula continued to listen, a small part of her rapidly becoming enraptured by the tale. She'd never heard of other lands on the horizon, now to actually be told of them. And still, Naruto continued. We struck from the shadows, bringing death to our lord's enemies for whatever we were called. At that time, the highest rank a shinobi could attain was that of Kage, or shadow, the leader of the village in which the ninja of his dominion dwelt. Naturally, the Kage also served the daimyo, for without their funding, the village and all those who inhabited it would essentially die without it. In the beginning of the shinobi era, to ensure their loyalty to one another, and I won't bore you with their specifics, an oath was enacted, a sacred ritual that was nothing of sort binding to both parties involved. It was discontinued by my time, and I only learned of it some years ago before my situation. He summed up his tale with a smile. I can think of nothing better to ensure we don't kill one another. Azula scowled, a touch of her old haughtiness creeping back into her expression. And I should agree to this, why? Because... Something in his sight hardened then, those cobalt blue eyes becoming more akin to the violent violet she so feared. Just looking at those eyes reminded her of how he'd played pinball with her body in the air, batting her back and forth as though she were no more than a child's ball. But it was what he said next, those chilling words, that truly dropped her heart into the pit of her stomach. Because, he continued, if you refuse to take the oath, I'll have to kill you. Right here. Right now. Banished or not, I can't risk you coming after me and my charges again. So, choose. Will you live, and swear yourself to my service to make a better person of yourself? Or will you die, another body heaped on my already overburdened conscience? The choice is yours. He folded both arms before his broad chest, all traces of humor devoid from the icy blue pools that were his eyes. Now, choose. The light rains had all but completely stopped, and they were presented with the infinite brilliance of the full moon, because the clouds themselves were fleeing as though they'd been swept aside by the hand of a giant. Azula wanted to utter a string of long and lengthy lamentations as he glared toward the inert shinobi who'd supposedly triggered it. She had the feeling he was trying to be overly dramatic, that, or nature itself really did fear him. Instead, she stood there, riveted. Rooted to the spot. Bound. Unable to move. Naruto would do it, she realized. He had no compunctions about killing. If she'd any doubt about his abilities, then their fight had put those to rest. Along with her pride. She would be the first to admit, that notion had been a touch too tempting when he'd enlightened her to it. Their idea of returning home to the life of royalty that she'd always known might not be so bad in lieu of one on the run. But a thorn of anger pricked her and held her back. Father had discarded her. Yes, he might welcome her back, but if he had already cast her out once, who was to say he wouldn't do it again the moment she displeased him? No. She catered to no one's whims. Except maybe. Those of the enigmatic blonde standing before her. From what she'd seen of his abilities thus far, he could probably obliterate most skilled benders, Ozai included, with a single swing of his hand. And yet he didn't. He was biding all his time, holding back for something. Waiting. But for what? Whatever it was, she was certain that she wanted to be by his side to see it happen. Just as she was certain his enemies would burn when all was said and done. And if the Fire Lord were to die during the conflict, then surely someone would need to step in and replace him. Not that dolt Zuzu, of course. And certainly not their fuddy-duddy of an Uncle Iroh. Yes, it certainly helped she was already inclined towards taking vengeance on her father, but really, what other choice did she have? The only way she could see any of those things through was if she lived. Life. I'll take the former, thank you. She said at last. She could only. Very good. Before she could think to stop him, he had a knife in his hand. Even as she recoiled, thinking it a betrayal, he slashed down on his arm, drawing blood in a spurt of red. Despite their dislike for one another, Azula actually gasped when he slit his wrist. Was he insane? Did he want to die? She stared agape, hopelessly baffled. And yet he seemed so at ease, calm and unperturbed despite the fact his lifeblood was essentially draining away right before their very eyes. Stop balking. He chided angrily, snapping her out of her daze, and give me your arm. Again, he moved faster than Azula could hope to think. Warm fingers wrapping around her wrist, taking hold of her small arm and tugging it toward him. She hissed when he made a small incision of his own, only to flush horribly as he laid his lips against it and licked. What sorcery was this? An ecstatic tingle raced up her back, threads of warmth gathering and spooling in a very uncomfortable place she'd rather not think about. Naruto wasn't a vampire, this was just some obscene ritual of his to ensure they didn't kill each other, and omidi argad white oesid feel sagud. Your turn. Wah! Shamefaced, she realized Naruto had stopped, he was now in the process of cleaning his lips. I said it's your turn. He held out his arm to her. Hurry before the wound closes. Alright. Blushing, she did as she was asked. The feeling that shot through her was like one of molten lava, just a taste, but one enough to warm her veins anew. No other word could describe it. Instead of the coppery taste she had since come to associate with her own blood, his tasted different somehow. Strong. Powerful. Light and airy, yet incredibly stern as well. Feelings unknown welled up within her as she held her lips to the injury, the tiniest of euphoria filling her. My blood is your blood. My arm is thine arm. My blade, your blade. My flame, your flame. Naruto recited. A faint numbness came over her as he spoke the words. This is the oath of our pact. We will not harm one another so long as we live, will not draw blood unto the pain of death. This is our pact. And then he was done, stripping a portion of his sleeve away to bind her cut. That was oddly specific. She pulled away, cringing slightly when he pulled the fabric taut. Hey, I don't choose the words. Naruto shrugged, cleaning their wounds. You should be lucky I even knew of this ritual. If I didn't, I would have dumped your body in a ditch the moment we switched back. The way he said it, so nonchalantly, was enough to send fingers of ice brushing down her spine. She had the distinct feeling she didn't know anything about this young man that he didn't want her to know, and to be honest, that frightened her. Terribly so. And yet in the same vein it also attracted her. Uzumaki Naruto. Such a conundrum. And now that we've finished that, he leaned in, smirking. Her heart quickened. I can. You can. She gasped, breathless. I can finally tell you about the tattoo I gave you. Just like that he leaned away, smirking at having gotten her so hot and bothered. Tattoo. Yup. Enjoy. Azula paled, whipping around as the blonde vanished in a swirl of leaves. All that was left was a mirror? Dreading what she might find, the ex-princess picked it up and tilted it, lifting the hem of her gown as she did so, determined to see what he had wrought. That was when she finally caught sight of Naruto's tattoo he'd left during his stay in her body. There, on her left ass cheek, carved by fire, a word. Juicy. By Agni, I will burn you. She's just so easy to mess with. Ended up catching up on some sleep after that. Put a seal on my diary, just in case. It would have been problematic if she'd learned that I impersonated her before the oath. Really glad she didn't learn that. I've enough problems without Little Miss Attitude trying to burn a hole in the seat of my pants. I get the feeling there'll be more than enough of that once we reach this fire temple thingy. Really, I find the idea of having former lives fine and all, but what the point of having so many if you can't just commune with them on the spot? Seriously. I've lived more than my fair share and I remember all of them just fine. The last thing I need is to be dragged to some godforsaken temple. I mean, really. It makes me wonder what I was thinking way back when, waiting for the Avatar to do something. Was I foolish to let it drag on this long? Could I have done something? Maybe but I digress. We're making relatively good time on Appa here, despite the cold shoulder everyone seems to be giving Azula. Even Suki's upset about it, leaving Haru with those villagers even though he asked to stay and protect them and taking on a dangerous firebender instead. They have every right to be wary, I suppose. Not that it'll matter, soon. I have plans of my own, pretty soon Ozai's going to be feeling a burn of his own. Speaking of burning, is it getting hot in here? Ah crap. Fireball. Naruto bit out a sigh and reluctantly set down his journal as another flaming ball of doom came hurtling out at them from behind, intent on swatting Appa from the sky once and for all. Aang's call had alerted him to the offending item, but even so he couldn't help but wonder why the boy hadn't dealt with it himself. No matter. An errant flick of the wrist was all it took to send the putrid projectile hurtling back from whence it came, the slightest application of Shinra Tensei violently rebounding it at the pursuing vessel, The sickening crunch of fire meeting steel was most satisfactory, but even then, their hunter didn't slow in the slightest. Zuko. God, he had to give the boy credit where it was due, he was remarkably persistent. He probably wouldn't be flinging those fireballs if he knew his little sister was up here with the Avatar, but Naruto wasn't inclined to tip that part of his hand yet. It was crucial to his plans that Ozai's oldest sibling didn't realize just how deep Azula was in until they reached the temple. He felt bad about breaking the boy's mind really, but he didn't see any other way to snap poor Zuko out of the inkling that his honor hinged on capturing the Avatar. You made your own honor. With that thought firmly locked within his mind, Naruto unslung his sword from his back, standing tall in the saddle just as another blazing ball of death came roaring down on them. Kubikiri Hucho screamed forward with a sibilant hiss, meeting the onrushing meteor and bisecting its smoldering surface, the blazing sphere of heat effortlessly, sending the severed halves tumbling away into the ocean. Since when can you do that? Sokka exclaimed, staring at the smoldering sword. Since always. Naruto barked back. Ah, Naruto? Suki's voice called him from the saddle. Kinda busy. Another swing, another fizzled fireball. It's important. Aang called. Goddammit Arrowhead, what could be so? The words died as Katara jerked him around to see what all the fuss was about. Oh. Blockade. Blockade. That was his first thought as he saw the fleet of ships lying in wait. Of course, there would be a blockade. They were headed into the Fire Nation, after all. He would have been surprised if they hadn't had one. Ozai was the paranoid sort, after all. Most Fire Lords were of the emotional sort, either so absorbed in their power that they wouldn't even consider an attack against their person, or so fearful that they would swarm their own border with so many ships that you'd have to be suicidal to make an attempt on them. But there were way too many of those. You'd have to be insane to take on a fleet like that. Thankfully, Naruto wasn't exactly sane. Yup, he decided, I think it's about that time. I can probably buy them a few hours if I use that. Think you can handle your big brother if he catches up? He asked of Azula. I can handle Zuzu, thank you very much. She sniffed, indignant. Then she frowned. But what are you? Naruto's only response was to smile. Then his lips claimed hers in a brief, scorching kiss. Katara and Suki colored. Aang and Sokka gawped. But absolutely none were as red as poor Azula. Inwardly screaming in both rage and delight, relishing the harsh movements that just barely walked the fence between force and violence, it was all she could do to gasp out a breath as he stepped away. What was that for? For good luck, what else? Cackling, the avatar of the gods shouldered his brutal blade and stepped backwards off the bison, submitting to the wild winds raging around them. Go on ahead. I'll see you guys in a few weeks. Again, the looks on their faces. He wouldn't have traded it for anything else in the world. Ah, priceless. The effect was almost immediate, gravity hooked its claws into him and he dropped, sinking like a stone. Naruto gave himself to the momentum, shooting downward feet first. A man-made comet in all its fiery and fury, he offered no resistance to the forces tugging at him, instead shooting downward as a spear from on high. Within moments, he was lost to the sight of his fellows. And as he fell, he let go, releasing all restraints locked upon his power, his body violently tearing itself apart as the energies trapped within came roaring back out. It was horrible. Horrifying. Blue eyes flashed black, his skin boiling in unhealthy ebony. It was something he rarely used, something that forced him to discard all restraint, all remorse. His own avatar state. He's insane. Azula cried, peering over the rim of the saddle, struggling to see the still streaking fireball that was her partner. There's no way he'll survive the landing. Suki simply yawned. 3. 2. Katara continued blithely. 1. Azula blinked, baffled by the countdown. A resounding bang signaled Naruto's arrival in the blockade. Is he supposed to be glowing? Aang asked. 5 heads poked out over the saddle, 6 if one counted a certain lemur gawping as a small tornado took up residence on the deck of the foremost ship. Then steel started flying. No, that's definitely new. Zhao was staring at a hurricane given flesh and form. Though there was no wind, for something was taking shape within the crater that had been the bow, black specks obscuring and spinning at a dizzying pace to the height of 6 tornado glowed an iridescent, scintillating shade of shot out and danced across the deck and men cried out. The commander all but froze, his smugly satisfied smile slowly slipping away from him and into the daylight as a strange and haunting tune began to fill the air, further perpetuating this strange phenomenon. A voice like thunder in the heavens shook them to their very bones, rattled them to their souls. Madness is a funny thing. Taking shape through the tornado was a man, or something like a man. The figure flashed blue, spraying light in every direction, and not even Zhao was fast enough to cover his eyes. When he looked again, when he dared to open his eyes, a figure unlike any he had ever seen stood between him and the kunoichi cowering wide-eyed in the grass. The man's body appeared to be carved from glossy red and black marble, or shaped from liquid metal, save for the large, cleaver-like blade cloth draped around his back. All you need. The men blinked rapidly, clambering away from the creature taking shape. 3 arms of glistening ebony extended outward on either side to make 6 in total, those rippling limbs glistening with untold power, untapped energies just waiting begging to be unleashed upon the world once more. Is a little push. Zhao swallowed once, one thought leaping to his mind as the creature stood woodenly. What is that? His clothes weren't so much clothes as skin, though he appeared to wear shoes and was sexless, his whole body was unrelieved black and every contour was crisply defined. He was lean and every muscle was etched, from his shoulders to his V of a chest to his stomach to his legs. There was something wrong about his skin, though. At first, the man or demon or statue made of flesh had reflected light like burnished steel. Now only parts of him gleamed, the crescents of his biceps, the horizontal slashes of his abdominal muscles. The rest of him faded from glossy black to faded scarlet whenever the shadows touched his being. Its head cocked no more than 5 degrees to the east, tilting almost in consideration for the maggots standing before it. Then it grinned. Time for a push, boys. Everything was suddenly a bloody burr, men and women were dying, fireballs were flying, and everything stood in complete chaos. And throughout it all, the god/demon stood unharmed. It laughed and made a swiping motion with one of its many hands, unseen punches pummeling through the deck to pound soldiers into a pasty pulp. It swung about, crushing the blockade with invisible pushes, sending the ships plummeting to death in the waters, sinking to the briny abyss with their crew and all. He was death-given form. Throughout it all, Zhao could only watch, in powerless horror. The creature cackled, tossing his sword forwards. Zhao scrambled backwards like a drunken crab, barely avoiding decapitation at the hands of the massive cleaver, cringing as the spinning blade plowed after him. It sank into the steel less than an inch from his head, splitting the hull in twine. And then inexplicably, he did the unthinkable. The eerie creature that Naruto had become suddenly faded, leaving him whole and human once more. He raised his hands. I surrender. What? The shout could be heard halfway around the world. Appa, now too far away to make his own roar of confusion heard, simply brayed in distress. For all the time that Naruto had bought them, they'd expected him to at the very least, rejoin them once they'd gotten past the blockade. Instead, they found him surrendering, with only his promise of seeing them again soon to comfort them. Azula wanted nothing more than to turn around and wring his neck for doing such a thing, but pressed for time as they were, they could only press onward. Still, everyone wondered. What the hell was Naruto thinking? Admiral Zhao could scarcely contain himself. He would be a legend for this day. He'd done it. Captured him. The Avatar. He'd been a touch worried when the boy had become that thing, but now it was over. He enjoyed every moment of slapping him in chains and tossing him into the brig, careful to shackle every part of his body. Wouldn't do for him to escape, after all. So here he is, he sneered, the words addressed to the prone form before him. Funny, I expected you to be older. Really? Much to his complete confusion, the young man actually sighed at those words, as though this entire ordeal were nothing more than a mere distraction on the road of life for him. I mean, really? That's it, huh? That's all you've got to say? I mean, I didn't expect much out of a thug like yourself, but damn. He shook his head, chuckling quietly, snickering in the face of the man's growing wrath. Why is it that the villain always has to have such cliched lines? Heaven forbid you'd have something, I don't know, interesting to say, considering you've got the pinnacle of godhood chained up in your basement. It doesn't matter who or what you say you are. Zhao sniffed. In his mind's eye, if this boy wasn't going to fear him, then there was no point in this fruitless intimidation. You are now my prisoner, the Fire Lord will be most pleased when I bring him the avatar in chains. You would have been wiser to fight to the death rather than surrender. Right. Even hearing Chain's grasp, this deadpan was barely concealed. So, then you must be the asshole in charge of pursuing me and my friends, Zhao, right? Unbidden he smiled, and it was not a pleasant thing, that old smile of his. Many thanks. You gave me the chance I needed to slip away. So, I'm gonna be merciful. I won't break you like the others. I'll just kill you. Kill me? Zhao scoffed, though he did take a swift step backwards. You fool. You're bound and in chains. Even if you could escape, I would never YEARGH. Those words trailed off into a girlish squeal as a boot unerringly roared out of the steel to plant itself between his legs. Even as the world reeled around him, a hand found his face and another, his neck. Then they began to twist, forcing the man's head at a hideously awkward angle. The last sound he heard was that of his own vertebrae snapping like so many twigs, then, nothingness. His last sight was that of this captive towering over him, boot pressing down. Crunch! Naruto stood over him, grinning like the devil himself. You were saying something, shithead? When Zhao's corpse didn't respond, he snickered. Oh no, he soothed. Don't get up on my account. I'll just be taking your ship for a little joyride. You don't mind, do you? Cloaked, he stalked up to the deck. The guards and the crew never saw what killed them, even the helmsman only felt the knife after it had slit his throat. There was a reason he'd surrendered, after all. He needed at least one fully functional vessel to carry out his mission. A mission that began, now. Smiling, Naruto took the wheel and gave it a hard turn. Sorry kids, he cast a wanton gaze to the skies, gazing wantonly at Appa's retreating form. You're going to be on your own for a little bit. Cracking his knuckles, he turned his attention to the helm. It pained him to leave his family behind, no matter how brief their separation might be, but preparations needed to be made. With Zhao firmly out of the way and whatever plans he'd made disrupted, he had every confidence that his disciples would be perfectly safe while he was gone. Zuko was no real threat to them. No, now he could begin the first phase of his plan, a plan to bring down the Fire Lord in the only way he knew how. Painfully. I've got some work to do. Chapter 9, Between a Rock and a Hot Place. What am I going to do? My name is Azula, daughter of Fire Lord Ozai and Ursa, and as I find myself writing this entry in Naruto's journal left behind by him of all things. The big lug, my heart wavers in my chest. I am banished. Allied with an airbender, waterbender, a warrior priestess, and a boy whose only talent seems to be his ungodly sense of a humor. Ah, and a lemur. So different, and yet so similar. In my short time with them I have pondered what could possibly unite and bind such a ragtag group together, what shared goal beyond that of common survival could cause them to tolerate one another's existence. I believe I have found my answer. Naruto. Words cannot express the enigma that he is. I have only known him for less than a day, and yet it feels as though it has been so much longer. He is fiercely protective of his charges, and yet at the drop of a hat he can smile and laugh with the best of them as though the weight of the world wasn't on his shoulders. There is a certain charisma about him, not just in the way he holds himself, but in the way he speaks, If bending words was an art, he would be its master. Every word he speaks has power. He makes me feel, gah. I don't know what to feel. Wanted? I would know more about him if he hadn't encrypted the rest of his journal from me. I believe he might be hiding something, and my lack of knowledge infuriates me to no end. But I digress. He claims not to be the Avatar, at least not the one my nation has so long been seeking. Once, I doubted. Now, however, I am inclined to believe him. The Avatar I know couldn't change into that creature and destroy an entire blockade on his own. Now he is gone, and I am left alone with my thoughts. I do not belong amongst these people. I am an outsider. An exile. A princess with no throne. I joined him out of necessity at first, even swore an oath on his behalf when he demanded it. It should gall me how utterly I am bound to him, but a small part of me takes pride in have a purpose again, in playing a part in the vengeance against my father. At least, it did. Because now Naruto is gone, commandeering a vessel of the enemy, an enemy I was once a part of. What is he thinking? What can he possibly hope to gain by stealing a single ship? Does he plan to attack my country? Throw himself at my father's mercy? All the world seems to think he is the Avatar. Surely Afeozai thinks the same. My mind races at the thought. Does he plan to use this chance to assassinate him? Is that his plan? If so, can he even succeed? Everyone seems so confident that he will return safe and unharmed. But what guarantee do we have? I've seen his power firsthand, and yet he can die. He professes to be just as mortal as anyone else. I have seen him bleed. I know he can be hurt. Hours have passed since he left us. We near the fire temple now, and I feel my heart leap into my throat. Even now I can feel their eyes on me. I'm not trusted. They think that I'll turn on them at the first opportunity, sell them out to the Fire Nation. Their mistrust is not unfounded. In another life I would have done just that. But now, I can't. I can feel the oath binding me, burning in my veins. Whatever he did to me, it's lasting. Permanent. I can no sooner betray him than end my own life. I suppose I can take some small comfort in the fact that he's fixed to the very same fate, but that's it. I've decided. I'm going to burn this entry once I've finished inscribing it. The possibility of Naruto finding it, and mocking me for my sentimentality, sudden as it may be, is galling to comprehend. Better for me to burn this page and all the thoughts and feelings attached to them. For better or worse I'm stuck with these miscreants. By Agni, I hope I haven't made a horrible mistake. So you miss him too, huh? Gah! Azula started at the sudden question and snapped the journal shut, quill quivering in her hand, her burning of the entries all but forgotten as she swung around. She found Suki staring back at her, a bemused expression on her face, hazel eyes glistening whitely in the fading light of the setting sun. There was no scrutinization there, no blame to be found, as it was with Sokka and Katara. Only pity. Empathy. Here was someone who could understand what she was going through, commiserate with her. Not that she'd ever admit, of course. What makes you think that? She blustered, keenly aware of the rising flush in her cheeks. Why would I miss that blubbering blonde buffoon? Suki smiled knowingly, sadly, and turned away. Tucking both knees into her chest, she turned her eyes toward the temple growing steadily larger on the horizon, mere minutes away. I miss him. She whispered. I do, too. Katara seconded from her place in the saddle, a forlorn look in her eyes as she gazed upon their impending destination, her own anger at the princess momentarily forgotten. I don't understand, why would he just give up like that? Why would he leave us? Then more quietly, as though she didn't want the others to hear, why would he leave me? In the corner of Azula's eye, Suki bristled. Oh dear. Evidently the waterbender hadn't been as quiet as she'd thought. Leave you? she challenged, incredulous as she bolted upright. What are you talking about? He's my boyfriend. He kissed me, remember? Just like that, battle lines were drawn. Oh yeah? Katara shot back, shooting to her feet. Well, I grew up with him. The Kyoshi warrior scowled. He's an immortal, for crying out loud. He doesn't age. And how do you know that? Because he told me. Then why did he kiss Azula? Oh. There was a silence as everyone realized what had just been said. Yeah, why did he kiss Azula? Suki frowned, recalling the very event that had chilled her to her very bones. Maybe we should ask her. Katara suggested. We should. With that, both girls brought their wrath firmly to bear upon the proud princess. Said Exile gulped. Don't involve me in this peasantry. Hey, knock it off both of you. Sokka interceded before the argument could reach a head and regretful words could be said. Faced with those glares, he almost wished he hadn't. Look, Naruto wouldn't leave unless he had a very good reason for it. Besides, everyone saw what he did to those Fire Nation ships. He tore through them like tinfoil. There's just no way he'd throw in that towel, unless he had some sort of plan. After all, that last ship was headed toward the Earth Kingdom, wasn't it? Didn't he say he'd meet up with at the North Pole, remember? Aang added. Their group admission was a simple one, plain, even. And yet the words left Azula stunned, Katara and Suki's words in particular. There was no politicking behind it, no subtle nuances of persuasion to sway anyone. Just a simple admission of feelings. In the Fire Nation it was all about maneuvering into a position of superiority before choosing a partner, and even then, such trysts were brief and tenuous. Never lasting. Yet the way they'd spoken of Naruto just now. Unbidden, she felt her cheeks color anew. Touching a hand to her face, she could only sigh. The fire temple swelled before her vision now, Appa uttering a soft groan of relief as they finally sat down. And yet despite all the danger that had to be awaiting them within, Azula couldn't stop herself from thinking about that damned blonde. By Agni, he's really gotten into my head. I hope your faith isn't misplaced. She muttered to Sokka. Yeah, this is Naruto we're talking about. The Water Tribe warrior snorted, rolling his eyes as he dismounted. I'm sure he's just fine. Achoo! A few miles inward on the coast, Naruto suddenly sneezed on the back of the Komodo rhino he'd appropriated from Zhao's stolen ship, exhaling hastily into the evening air. Even from here he could see the setting sun, a rosy red orb ponderously descending before his very eyes. It made him wonder about Suki, Azula, and all the others. With Zhao out of the picture, he doubted they had much to fear. Still. Damn, but he missed them already. After only a few hours he'd made landfall on the coast and headed inland, mooring the vessel he'd commandeered and abandoning it without a second thought. That aside, he'd made remarkably good time. It was truly a marvel, what you could do with all the powers of a god and a small shadow clone army at your back. It rankled him to leave his new family behind, but no matter how much they cared for him and heed him, he knew they wouldn't understand what he had to do. Aang had his own path. And the avatar of the gods had his. He'd realized this ever since the boy had tried to take him to task yesterday for sinking Azula's ship and killing all of her soldiers. It was something he'd been trying to ignore, but now it was impossible. The boy couldn't kill. Maybe someday, but not now. Aang, and by definition all the power trapped deep within him, was crippled by kindness and mercy. Compassion. It was all well and good to empathize with the common man, even give a second chance to those who truly deserved it. Azula stood as a prime example of this, but only because she was now physically incapable of doing any harm to either of them. Were it not for the oath, she would be just as dangerous as any other enemy, cold and unfeeling and utterly undeserving of any mercy. Naruto knew this and accepted it. But Aang didn't. He hadn't seen the horrors of war. He was just a kid. Yes, that boy, he was naive. Dangerously so, clashing with Zuko, and then Azula had only served to drive that point home. The Fire Nation accepting Old Man Iroh was hard. Ruthless. They weren't going to thank Aang for sparing them. They'd simply wait until his back was turned and drive a knife home. And while he learned how to splash around at the North Pole, their doom drew ever nearer in the form of Suzan's comet. I can't believe I didn't see this sooner. I was the foolish one. I was naive. I can't believe I thought he could do this. Naruto had long been aware of the comet's impending return in this coming summer. Telling Aang only would have pressured him all the more. And yet, some small part of him had hoped that the boy would accept what was clearly his duty as Avatar and make for the North Pole without delay. Detour after detour had changed his mind. The incident with Habai, and now venturing into enemy territory, it was the last straw. He wouldn't gamble the fate of the world on someone who may slash or may not be able to kill the Fire Lord. No, the Avatar couldn't be solely relied upon. A contingency plan was needed. If the Fire Nation had an army, then he too would raise an army. When Ozai tried to scorch the land black with fire, he would find an angry horde of earthbenders there to greet him. It would only a few weeks, maybe less, but in that time he was confident he could succeed. The eclipse that he knew of simply wasn't a feasible option at present. It was too far away. If he was willing to throw down his life like last time, then fine, maybe he could penetrate the Fire Nation on his own and end Ozai himself before he was overwhelmed. A lifetime ago, he might have done just that in any case and left his fate up to chance. But not now. Not when he had so much to live for. No, this was the best plan. And if he happened to pick up an earthbender that could teach Aang on the way, then so be it. According to this map, the first village he'd happen upon would be Jailing, a picturesque little town located in the mountains of the southern Earth Kingdom. As he recalled, it was home to the Beifong family, or at least it had been during his last visit a century before. The Beifongs owed him more than a few favors anyhow. That'd probably be the best place to start. So here he was, making his first foray into Earth Kingdom territory. His destination? Ba Sing Se, a flying would have been easy, but in doing so he feared bringing too much unwanted attention down on his head. The world might think him the Avatar, and while was ill-content to carry on the deception, he understood the necessity of it all. Best to let it be and sell off his mount when he reached the next town. From here he would proceed on foot, walk the dirt road like the common folk, feigning ignorance at his surroundings. As soon as he rid himself of the tail that continued to dog him. He wasn't quite sure when he'd picked up this particular pursuer, only that a strange scent had been following him for the last hour or so. Tailing him as he trekked inroad. Strange, it was almost as if there were two of them. Like a rider and a mount. But what mount could possibly track him over such a long distance? These folk didn't have ninja hounds. In the time that he'd spent in this country, he hadn't seen any creature that knew how to hunt through scent alone. Unless it was a Shirshu. That was his last thought before something long and wet struck at him from the shadows. His arm rose smoothly and intercepted the foreign object, only to fall to his side seconds later, numbed. Naruto swore and spun away in a flurry of motion, vaulting off his mount just as the tongue lashed out for him again, inadvertently striking and crippling his mount in one swipe, sending the now paralyzed beast crashing to the ground, whilst its owner scurried to safety. All the while he was cursing himself for his carelessness, anger knotting his whiskered visage as he tucked and rolled, tossing himself headlong into the forest. Oh, a woman's voice, warm and sweet like honey, purred at his retreat. "You're good. Very good. This might be a challenge after all." Tempting as it was to, Naruto didn't reply. He was too busy damning himself for his own incompetence. Stupid. He swore virulently, futilely trying to rub sensation back into his now encumbered limb. Foolish. After all these years he spent in the water tribe, he'd gotten rusty. Sloppy. He should have seen something like this coming miles away. How could he have forgotten about that beast's paralyzing toxins? Even now he could feel the strange, senseless sensation creeping across him despite his chakra's attempt to resist it. The muscles in his torso were already becoming stiff and rigid, making his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Regeneration or no, this wasn't something he could just purge without consequences. For all his expertise in all things violence, he was no master of toxins and poisons. For every second that he fought it, another of his concentration was wasted. The crack of a whip jerked him back to reality. Sick M, Nyla. Naruto dropped flat to the ground just as the Shirshu came bursting through the brush, jaws wide. Its deadly tongue severing a few hairs in passing, but thankfully not touching his flesh. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as it swept over him, paws helplessly overextended, tender belly exposed to attack. And attack Naruto did. In a monumental effort he lashed up and out, placing all his weight onto his good arm and erupting upward in a fearsome kick. He was rewarded by the satisfying crack of bone and the tearing of sinew, a sickeningly powerful blow that launched the tracker beast and its rider away from him with a pained howl, hurtling them into wind and into the branches. But not before Nyla's tongue brushed his cheek. Shit! The avatar of the gods reeled. Numbness consumed him, paralyzing him completely. His body slumped to the ground, stiff and unfeeling. Out of the corner of his eye and dancing in his paraphials, he finally saw her. Dark, ebon hair. Pale skin. A heart-shaped face, eyes glittering like diamonds. Very angry diamonds. His eyes were naturally drawn onto her swaying hips as she moved towards him. This woman didn't walk. She glided. Each step was smooth and graceful, not a single movement wasted. No. There was a slight lurch to her movements, he realized. Her left arm hung loose and broken at her side, her whip clutched tight in her offhand. All right, she growled upon reaching him. Now I'm really going to enjoy collecting that bounty on your head, Avatar. Oh, this was rich. Despite himself and the situation in which he found himself, Naruto found the gall to laugh. Can I just say one thing? Her eyes hardened. What? You're going to regret this. Oh, I don't think so, handsome. There came a flash of black and then blackness. Zuko had thought he'd seen it all. He had been burned, beaten, battered, stripped of everything but his pride. He had struggled and fought and strived, survived in spite of everything life had thrown at him. Indeed, life as an exiled prince was seldom an easy one, certainly more so when you couldn't return without capturing the Avatar. But even when he'd finally found him, it hadn't been enough. Fate decided to spit in his face once again. The Avatar wasn't some feeble old man he could capture, he was an accomplished bender who'd beaten him black and blue. At every encounter, every confrontation, it only ended in his defeat. Time and time again his destiny laughed at him, eluding him at every turn. And now, this. He tracked the Avatar to the Crescent Island, followed him through the blockade and into the Fire Temple. At least he thought he had. And then this happened. It had been terrifying, witnessing such a feat of destruction as that. He supposed he could take some solace in the knowledge that Zhao had retreated with his tail between his legs, or so he thought. But everything had gone wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. Shu's betrayal aside, it rankled him to know that the Avatar and his friends had not only managed to deceive the Fire Sages into opening the door, but enabled him to escape into Roku's sanctum as well. That shouldn't have been such a problem. With 4 Fire Sages at his back, he should have been able to subdue his little friends left to guard the door. Kill them. Capture them, at the very least. Now those sages were dead. Cut down, as effortlessly as one would through butter. The waterbending wench and her brother hadn't done anything. Even the Kyoshi warrior hadn't raised her fans against him. They had no need to. Because someone had done all the killing for them. Yes, they all paled in comparison to the foe standing before him. Barring his path was a face that had haunted his worst nightmares, plagued him from his very childhood. Azula. You. What are you doing here? He barely recognized his sibling with her long hair and simple garb, the rustic red she always wore nowhere to be seen amidst the simple brown and green she now wore, with those ebon dresses, but that face, those eyes, that cocky, arrogant, half-lipped smile. There was no doubt about it. This was his little sister. The very same sister who had just torn through the fire sages, killing them without so much as a glimmer of hesitation. The princess sighed softly and low, a small smile plucking at her lips in spite of the anxiety she felt at seeing her brother again. It wasn't sentimentality that gave her pause, she told herself. She'd never cared much for him to begin with. But what was it, then? What was holding her back? What was preventing her from conjuring a bolt of lightning and striking him down now? She felt constricted somehow, the glorious powers she'd always known now a tiny, flickering flame when faced with her one and only sibling. Agni, what was going on here? In my country we exchange a pleasant greeting before getting down to business. She began, forcing a smile to her face. The words came quite easily to her afterwards, almost painfully so. Have all these years apart made you uncivilized, Zuzu? Zuzu? Sokka smothered a snort with his hand. Katara and Suki were less inclined. Don't call me that. Anger exploded forth from him in an angry wave of hot steam. And answer my question. Why are you with them, sister? I think that's quite obvious, dum-dum. Raising an arm, she took a stance, placing herself firmly between him and the door. She could see the anger building in her brother like magma in a volcano, an apocalyptic fury mere moment away from reaching a boil and ready to blow. Her next words caused the eruption. I'm on their side. There was an awful silence as all the color in Zuko's face drained, his ruddy red scar standing stark upon his now palled visage. A heartbeat of peace, a second of nervous tension. Then. Azula, Katara muttered, I think you broke him. Rah! A finely manicured hand shot up, interposing itself between the fireball and Katara even as Zuko targeted her. The waterbender barely had time to gasp before the small comet of destruction fizzled out before Zuko and Azula were moving, exchanging blows and bending at a breakneck pace. Blue battled against orange as they circled one another, the fury of their fire ebbing and flowing in the waning light of the setting sun. Why? Zuko roared. Why are you always making things difficult for me? What can I say? Azula shrugged as she weaved between his rage-driven and sloppy strikes. I'm a people person. Her brother made a squelching sound. You. Azula, Katara started forward. We can help. Wait. She extended her other arm, barring the bender's path before she could take so much as another step. Hazel eyes narrowed upon her brother, the bleak specter of a past she was still struggling to forget. There was only one way to settle this, she realized. Running wasn't an option. The only way to move forward, the only way to truly bury her past, was through him. He's mine. Stepping forward, she thrust a finger at her brother. Zuko, she began slowly, I challenge you. At least, she thought to herself, she had the sweet satisfaction of surprising him again. To an Agni Kai. Mine. Naruto woke with a start. Pain flooded him in a tidal wave, the ache of a body that had fallen asleep for far too long. Old pangs. He found himself bound, shackled in heavy links of chain and steel, unable to move so much as a muscle. Speaking of moving, why was the ground? Through blurry eyes he struggled to look down. Indeed, the ground was moving slowly by under his gaze, allowing him to realize he lay draped not over Nyla as he'd suspected but the Komodo rhino he'd stolen, its 4 feet plodding heavily in the night. Why was that, his addled mind wondered. It would have made more sense for her to be riding her Shirshu. Oh. Memory crashed down him, reminding him where he was. What he'd done. Who he was with. Morning, handsome. A soft voice purred in his ear, dark tresses tickling at the nape of his neck. Naruto nearly laughed. It had been a long time since he'd woken to a voice like that, even longer since he'd been bound and heard those words. Sleep well? Well, he murmured, somehow finding the strength to turn his head. Hello, beautiful. The name's June. she replied. And you must be this Naruto character the world's been buzzing about. Her piercing gaze scrutinized him for a moment longer before relenting. Funny, I thought you'd be a little older, considering the wanted posters. A smirk. What, you don't think I'm devilishly handsome or ruggedly good-looking? I might have, before you drop-kicked me. The deadpan was barely concealed beneath a veneer of amusement. Self-defense. The blonde immediately claimed. Right. Right as rain, beautiful. I told you, my name is June. Think I'll stick with beautiful. Naruto returned cheekily. An awkward silence passed between them after that. So, kinda asking the obvious here, but how did you find me? My Shirshu can smell a rat a continent away. She sniffed proudly. Behind them, the beast brayed proudly. Ah. She got a name? Nyla. Alright then, beautiful, where are you and Nyla taking me? Another silence. I'm handing you over to the Fire Nation. June said at length, her smug countenance not wavering in the slightest as she spoke. We'll be stopping in jailing for the evening. By tomorrow you'll find yourself a nice cozy prison cell while I collect the reward money on your head. Nothing personal, of course. You should be glad I decided to take you alive instead of dead you after you broke Nyla's rib like that. It's a good thing she's a swift healer. Ah. That would explain why the Shirshu was limping behind them, rather than being ridden by June. She didn't want to exacerbate her mount's injury until it was mended. Any chance I could talk into letting me go? He pleaded. Not an hog monkey's chance in hell. She replied. Whenever I take a contract, I see it through to the end. I finish my jobs. You get points for trying, though. Well, at least that counted for something. So then, she continued, restraining another smile, are you going to be a good little avatar and stay like that, or do I have to break out the whip again? Oh, you've got a mouth on you. It's a shame I'll never get to see you use it. Big talk for a man in chains. Came the reply, punctuated by the crack of a whip. Naruto sighed at her failed attempt to intimidate him further. His pupils dilating as increased adrenaline began to pump through his system, his visible eyes shining bright with bloodlust. His teeth gleamed with a wolfish light in the shadow of his ragged locks, his lips parting for an almost amused hiss. Enough was enough. He'd learnt all he needed to. Time to escape. Let me ask you, he began softly, does a woman like yourself know how truly terrifying an avatar can be? The dark-haired beauty arched an eyebrow, turning slightly in the saddle to address him. You say that like there's more than one avatar. Bingo! The shinobi grunted then, a shout building in his throat as he looked beyond the boundaries of flesh and delved into the very core of his being. Ha-ah-ah-iya. June frowned, a glimmer of suspicion plucking at the corners of her mouth as the sky brightened around them, his skin turning gold, then azure, then crimson, all at once as the chakra locked within him was forced into the air, pushed up from the well of his coils and onto the surface. Wait, what are you? Sapphire eyes snapped into slitted scarlet, his skin cracking and bursting as the power within was unbound. Frightened by the sudden upswing of energy, the Komodo rhino roared and bucked, tossing both prisoner and hunter off its back before bolting into the forest. What the hell are you? She shouted at Naruto. With a mighty movement of his arms, he tore himself free from his bonds, the iron links shredding like fine linen beneath his chakra. Naruto stood woodenly, body burning with blackness. A pair of arms sprouted on either side of him as his skin burnished black. He seemed to gain an extra foot in height as she looked on, the vile, terrifying V-shaped visor of his avatar state now glowering down at her. The ebon-colored god growled low and deep, a throatish snarl snaking its way out between those razor-sharp teeth. I warned ya. An ash-filled breath blew into her face, nearly causing her to cough. Now you pay the price. Even as she raised her whip to strike at this man-made demon, his fist lashed out. One touch. That was all it took. One touch, and her precious weapon disintegrated, rotting like so much driftwood beneath his clenched fist. Left clutching the ruined shaft of her once proud tool, the huntress was left with one of two choices, neither of which were very appealing. And only one ended with her living to see the next sunrise. June did the smart thing, then. She raised her hands. I give up. Naruto grinned. Good girl. The sound of flame tearing through the atmosphere rang in the temple as Zuko struck out repeatedly. Azula deflected the blows with counters of her own, flowing so much like the rippling movements she'd once seen an eternity before. At least, it felt like it. She'd seen Naruto move like this during their battle, and though he hadn't had the time to teach her, let it not be said that she wasn't a fast learner. She was a prodigy, after all. He wasn't. And she had something much stronger than anger driving her right now. They moved forward and backward, their motions a terrifying mockery of a romantic waltz. The fight quickly took on a life of its own, leading them from one great halt to the next, a furious dance of fiery, bending blows that never seemed to end, neither backing down, both of them determined to win. Zuko for his honor, Azula for the oath that bound her to very bones. Whatever hesitation she'd felt at the beginning was gone, replaced by the ironclad knowledge that her brother would kill her if she made a mistake. You really are a fast learner. A small, familiar voice interjected into her head. I was right to have you join our team. Azula started in surprise, hissing softly as Zuko's flaming fist broke through her guard to raise an angry red welt on her cheek. Snarling, she struck out without restraint, catapulting him away in a gout of blue fire. Naruto? Her gaze darted this way and that, half expecting to find the eternal shinobi hanging off the walls or ceiling. He wasn't there. Wasn't anywhere. Was she hearing things? Had she finally gone off the deep end? Who did you expect, the bogeyman? Where are you? In your head, of course. Came the bemused, slightly strained reply. You didn't think the oath was just a simple exchange of blood, did you? I'm able to contact you at a moment's notice, and the reverse applies to you in any case. No, seriously. Out of the corner of her eye, Azula could see Zuko getting back up. There was a fire in his eye, one that didn't bode well for her. What are you doing right now? A sheepish chuckle was her answer. Actually, I'm headed to jailing at the moment. But that's not why I'm contacting you. Is Aang safe? Azula restrained a grimace. If you call being trapped behind a door safe. And your brother? I can handle him. Good. Bring him down, Azula. He ordered, his voice taking on a flinty tone. Break him. Make him hurt. A small smile plucked at her lips. Now there was an order she didn't mind obeying. Consider it done. Azula forgot that Aang and the others were still nearby. Forgot that she had a sworn duty to protect them. All she could think about was defeating her brother, ending Zuko once and for all. Making him pay for the slight against her, for insinuating that she'd chosen this fate for herself, willingly betrayed her nation. Making him pay for the pain his accusations caused her. Her mind was blank with rage as she slammed against him, azure tongues of white-hot fury clashing violently with his orange in an endless inferno that seemed to burn hotter than hell itself. I'm sorry it has to end this way, brother. Azula sighed and parried a right hook with her heel, sweeping the limb down and away with the slightest misdirection. It could have turned out so differently. No, you're not. Why are you doing this? He demanded between blows. You wouldn't understand. She snarled in return, sparks scrawling from her fingertips. Father betrayed me. I made one mistake, one error, and he cast me aside like garbage. But I suppose you'd know what that feels like, don't you? Now I have a new duty to perform. One that doesn't include you. Trailing after her in the air, lightning itself tore through the temple, bending to her very will. Zuko stood transfixed, eyes shooting wide as he.
Zuko choked in surprise as the bold bolt screamed forward to spear him through the shoulder, shattering his armor with a resounding clang.
Before his mind could process what had just happened, another bolt ripped through the flesh of his thigh, skewering it clean through. Howling, he crumpled, clutching at his ruined limb.
You lied to me.
The words were a yowl in his throat, accusing her of everything.
You said you wouldn't interfere 3 years ago. Like I've never done that before. Damn it, Azula. He screamed. I hate you. Then come get me, Zuzu. Arg.
Katara watched in surprise as Azula calmly waited for her brother's anger to overcome him, his eyes narrowing in anticipation, a gout of fire escaping his teeth as the flame within truly took control. With a roar, Zuko charged, alarmingly fast, but like the graceful dancer she was, his sibling waited until the last second before dodging. As the scarred prince hastily tried to stop his charge, she pounced on him, raining blow after blow on his unprotected back until he finally managed to spin and face her, beginning their deadly dance once again.
Weakling. Traitor. Dumb. You're the reason Mother left.
They were so engrossed in their squabble that neither noticed the ground beneath their feet was shaking. Nor did they notice that Aang was finally emerging from the chamber, not as the boy they knew, but as Avatar Roku in all his grandeur. A picture of flaming fury, his eyes burned white-hot, terrifying to behold. And they definitely didn't notice him bring his hand down upon the floor with an audible crack, cracking it like a nut, releasing the magma trapped beneath the surface.
Azula didn't notice. Azula! Suki shouted. We need to go. Now! The princess wasn't listening.
Naruto himself could have kissed her right then, and she still wouldn't have noticed. She was too filled with wrath, the thin veneer of her calm serving only to mask the anger beneath.
But no longer. That last insult had torn through the facade, exposed the true demon beneath. Mother. My own mother thought I was a monster. Mother. I believe someone needs a lesson in humility.
She stepped forward with a hot hiss and struck at her brother like a viper, sending him sprawling with a deceptively swift swing of her heel.
That was all it took.
Another swing swept his visage into the nearest wall, eliciting an gravelly groan of surprise from her older sibling. He slumped to the floor with a groan.
And then suddenly he was on her.
She didn't know how he'd gotten up so swiftly, only that he had, and he was suddenly pinning her to the floor, his hands wrapped around her throat. She grabbed at his arms and he took hold of her wrists, grappling.
Are you going to kill me, Zuzu? She sneered. You don't have the guts. Shut up. Poor dum-dum.
Azula smiled up at him, full lips curling as she called him the age-old name from their childhood.
You just don't get it, do you? Even if you do kill me, you've still lost. You can't beat me. I'm better than you. Always have been. Always will be, no matter what you do. You think fighting for your honor gives you strength?
Her voice rose an octave as she recalled what her so-called honor had gotten her.
Well, it doesn't. It only lets others control you. Don't you see? You're too busy chasing after father's coattails to realize it. He can't restore your honor. You make your own, brother. For a moment, the anger warping his visage disappeared. Then as suddenly as it vanished, so too did it return. I told you to be Chuurk.
His words ended in a startled grunt as Azula reared back and bucked, using her smaller body to arch backwards and kick him in the face.
Hard.
To her surprise, Zuko made no move to dodge, even when the backs of her boots slammed into his chin with all its might. There was a silence, the princess unable to believe she'd actually struck him that hard. The scarred prince startled to find he'd actually been flung across the hall. A trickle of blood trickled down from his mouth, trailing across a cheek and down his chin. Azula was on him in an instant, fist thrust forward, ready to deal the death blow, fingers twitching with the contained energies of her bending. Groaning, he attempted to stand once more and continue the fight, only for his wounded leg to finally give out.
Folding like a wet paper bag, the prince lost his balance. He did not rise. Collapsing forward onto his hands and knees instead, he glowered impotently at her, silently seething as the fire temple continued to crumble around them. Brother and sister stared one another down. One lay broken, the other stood tall. One stepping into the beginnings of redemption, the other still hopelessly lost in the dark.
Yeah.
Sokka crowed.
Team Avatar 1, Zuko, nothing.
What are you waiting for?
Zuko cried.
Finish it. For a moment, Azula considered doing just that, snuffing out his life like the candle it was.
Zuko was helpless. Weak. She could easily finish him off. Naruto might even encourage such a thing. It would be swift. Simple, and stayed. A mercy, even.
And yet a thorn of compassion pricked her and held her back.
She not a creature of empathy by any means, not yet, so what was it that stopped her from administering the final blow?
Blue fire flickered at her fingertips as she contemplated the notion, all of her being warring with the life-changing act of taking her older brother's life.
Zuko.
Azula froze as a familiar voice tore through the air, eyes narrowing as stout form resolved itself from the smoke. Her princess felt her heart skip a beat. Here was a face she hadn't seen in 3 years, and yet he looked almost exactly the same. There was a bit more gray in his beard, she supposed, and a few more wrinkles than she remembered, but beyond that it was undoubtedly him.
Iroh. Uncle.
The word was spoken by both brother and sister as one, flabbergasted.
Zuko, because he honestly hadn't expected his tea-drinking relative to follow him into the thick of battle, and Azula, because Iroh was undoubtedly the last person she wanted to see right now. Old though he may be, the Dragon of the West was no slouch. He could probably match her in terms of firebending alone, and that was without hand-to-hand combat. No, she told herself as she watched him kneel beside Zuko's battered body, she wasn't happy to see him. She couldn't be.
She refused to allow her lip to quiver as she looked him in the eye.
Are you going to finish him off?
He was giving her an odd look, as though he almost didn't recognize his niece after the transformation she'd been through. Azula hardly recognized herself. She still felt the anger trying to burn its way through her veins, her old pride and arrogance simmering just beneath the surface. But there was a calmness now, a sense of serenity that hadn't been there before the oath.
Clarity, really.
And it was in that moment of beautiful, crystalline clarity that she realized killing Zuko served nothing and no one besides her spite.
With that knowledge, she lowered her fingers. No, she decided at last, spinning away and scrubbing at her face so he wouldn't see the tears. I've taken his leg. That will do. Azula! Sokka shouted. What are you doing? We gotta go. This place is coming down.
She started after him.
You're with them.
Somehow coming from him, it didn't sound like a question. Azula stopped in her tracks, her face slowly appearing over her shoulder as she curiously regarded her uncle and her fallen opponent. A look of subtle irritation crossed her single eye as it regarded the recovering prince behind her, his good eye still narrowed spitefully upon her.
I found my own path, uncle.
Someone, she very nearly choked on her own pride before swallowing it back down, showed me how important the balance really is.
Technically it was true, in a sense.
At first Naruto had unbalanced her by defeating her on Kyoshi Island.
Then again during the incident with Heibai in the forest. But in a way, all that had been equalized.
Not just by the oath, though it was certainly a part of it, but by his words to her in the forest after her second defeat.
Honor is something we forge ourselves. No one can give it to you, and nothing can take it away. And then, that kiss on the bison. It was Naruto, wasn't it?
The ghost of a smile drew at her lips.
He can be very persuasive.
Iroh laughed at that, the sound coming from deep within his belly.
Yes, he can.
If the princess of the Fire Nation. Azula flinched, both at the words and at the second tremor that shook the palace. With less of a threat against him, Aang's strike hadn't been as catastrophic as they'd first feared.
Yes, the temple was falling apart at the seams, but nowhere near the deadly collapse that would have originally happened. Yet even the falling rocks could not hope to eclipse her words.
Ex-princess, actually.
She whispered. Atheozai, she bit out, banish me for my defeat against the Avatar days ago.
Iroha's face fell.
I see, I am sorry to heart that. A hand stroked at his bearded chin, yet failed to mask the disappointment there. It appears my brother is still as foolish as he is stubborn.
Isn't he, though?
She sighed, stroking at her long locks. Precisely why I intend to depose him.
Zuko growled from where he lay.
She's lying.
She has to be. Azula always lies. A swift chop on the neck rendered him insensate.
Not this time, big brother. With a bitter laugh Azula lowered her arm, turned and strode towards the hole Aang had made, through which Sokka had just departed.
Goodbye, Zuko. Uncle.
There was something about the way she said those words, some sense of finality caused Iroh to start.
Surely, she wasn't thinking of Azula. Too late, with a cackle she leapt out after Sokka and into the void.
Not a moment later, Iroh saw the sky bison. Within seconds, it and his niece were gone to the winds. Part of him rejoiced to know that Azula had been set on the proper path. Perhaps she might be able to redeem their strange, twisted little family after all.
And yet he worried. It was well known to him that Naruto was not the Avatar.
He was one of the few in the nation there was a darkness in.
Come on, nephew.
Iroh began, picking his nephew up and slinging him over a shoulder.
I believe it is time we return to the ship. With that, he leapt out of the hole and into the waiting waters below.
Team Avatar rode on into silence, chasing the setting sun. They were all covered in ash and soot from the eruption, but they were alive. Some wondered if the same could be said for Iroh and Zuko, if they'd made it out before the temple had well and truly collapsed. There were more pressing matters on their minds of course, such as the matter of Naruto's continued disappearance and now Susan's comet. But chief amongst them was another factor.
Sitting with them.
Only moments ago, she had defended them, and so the group dynamic had changed once more. Sokka was the first to recover her voice.
Azula, she began, that was amazing. Sokka finished, awed and enthused. I've never seen fire bending like that before. You were bending lightning. That's it. I've thought up the perfect nickname for you. Lightning Lass. Why, thank you.
The former princess preened under their praise. Only a select few firebenders are able to control lightning, and I'm proud to count myself amongst them. Perhaps, this was what she'd always wanted. She craved attention and praise, she always had. And now that she had it again it felt good. A grimace touched her face as her brain registered the rest of Sokka's words, however. Although, I could do without the nickname.
Ah, but I spent all night thinking about it. So, can you teach me that? Aang asked, suddenly hesitant as he found himself face to face with the former princess.
Naruto never really talked to me about it, but I figured that's why he had you join the group and I never had a chance to ask.
Of course, I'm going to teach you.
Azula folded her arms and snorted, her gaze narrowing.
Why else would I have joined you miscreants?
Well, there was Naruto, but she wasn't about to tell anyone that.
That's great. But not the blue fire. Azula put in primly. That's mine. A girl has to have some secrets, after all. Everyone laughed at that. Even Azula.
It felt so strange to laugh again, she couldn't recall that last time she'd felt genuinely happy.
Joy was an alien emotion to her.
With fear there was always someone to manipulate and control, dominate so they would never turn against you.
There was none of that now.
She'd stood in their defense and now everyone was welcoming her as one of their own.
Well, almost everyone.
Here. Katara reluctantly handed her a loaf of bread. Azula looked at her as though she had two heads. What? The waterbender grumbled, her dislike for the Fire Nation surfacing once more beneath the older girl's gaze. You must be hungry after all that bending, right? Just take the darn thing. Azula did so. The taste, it was good. Before she knew it, she had finished the entire thing and felt more full than she had since her banishment. Resting tiredly on the saddle, she absently noted the scent of the evening air, the feel of the bison's fur, and the steady stream of tears that ran down her face. Bringing a hand to wipe away the wet tears, she relished in the feeling she currently felt. She smiled, finally feeling alive. To the naked eye, Jailing wasn't all that impressive compared to most towns. It had been left absolutely untouched during the war thanks in part to its strategic importance and the small army of talented benders who made their homes there were known to viciously defend their homes from any and all enemy incursions. So had it been a century before, and so was it now. The sun was slow rising in the east, the first rays of morning slashing daggers across their vision as they strolled through the streets. Naruto sighed, breathing deep the Earth Kingdom air. It had been so long since he'd been here, even after 100 years, everything was still the same. The faces were new of course, but the scenery, the rolling hills and the fine shops selling silks and fish and other goods had changed precious little. They would be making very good time here, he thought. Everyone seemed to be giving them a wide berth. Perhaps it was the Shirshu. Maybe it was the massive sword strapped to his back. Word of his return might have already spread this far. Who knew? Regardless, they'd be getting what they came here for soon enough. Yes, they. June groaned behind him in the saddle, the iron manacles that were her shackles chafing against her wrist. Nyla whimpered piteously beneath them, detesting the ill treatment of her master yet fearing their captor too much to make a move all the same in any case. It seemed the Shirshu had not forgotten those broken ribs. Indeed, despite having healed, the tracking beast was treating the last Uzumaki like an alpha predator, more so since he'd taken its mistress into custody, less so with its muzzle. Rightfully so. Naruto wasn't too keen on being paralyzed again. Another groan reminded him of the human's plight. Can you please untie me now? She begged piteously. I surrendered, remember? Yes, I remember. Naruto grinned, hands tight on the reins, and the key with them. That's the only reason you're still breathing. Irk. That seemed to silence her somewhat, the defiance dimming from her eyes. Still the pall stretched on, until the shinobi became genuinely uncomfortable. He was a social creature by nature, accustomed to having travel companions with him on his journeys. That said companion was a willing prisoner and giving him the silent treatment put a damper on things. Look, he chided her, it's nothing personal. I just can't afford to have you report my location back to the Fire Nation. Besides, I could use a tracker with your expertise. It was the wrong thing to say, and the shinobi swore at himself even as the words left his mouth. June struck him as the sort not to let something like that stand. Sure enough, he was right. Oh. Just like that, the glint was back again. This time a smile accompanied it. So, you're using me for my body then? Still smirking, she pressed up against him from behind, her chin taking up residence upon his neck as her words warmed his ear. What's the matter, Avatar? Like what you see. A century or two ago, Naruto would have flushed and sputtered like an idiot. Now he simply shook his head. What's not to like? He replied, spurring Nyla onward. But no, as attractive as you might be, that's not the reason I'm keeping you around. Then what is? For starters? He turned, giving her his full and undivided attention, trusting Nyla to go where gentle nudges of his legs guided her. You and your little pet are the best trackers I've ever met. In terms of tracking, the two of you could probably run circles around Kiba and Akamaru. Friends of yours, I take it? Naruto's mouth snapped shut with a harsh click of enamel, his eyes turning hard and distant as he swung back around. For a time, the only sound was that of Nyla plodding forward. June knew immediately she'd trod where she wasn't meant to. She knew enough about painful pasts to tell when she'd stepped on a landmine. Her own stood as a stark example of that. And if that avatar's abrupt lockjaw had anything to do with it, she was fairly certain he'd lost his share of friends and family growing up as well. "Once," he said at last. "A long, long time ago." "Sorry," she murmured and glanced away, genuinely contrite. "How did they die?" "They were betrayed." The words came slowly, haltingly. "One of my old comrades, a man named Uchiha Sasuke, was responsible. We'd thought he reformed, changed his ways. But a darkness like that, you don't just leave it behind. It follows you. Consumes you. Becomes you. I don't know when or how or even why he did it. He just killed them, then others. So many others." His words grew rough then, harsh and angry, grating on her ears. When it became clear he wasn't going to stop, "I did what I had to do. I killed the killer. The golden boy, the one person my village thought could do no wrong. And in doing so, I lost everything. I didn't know. No, it's not your fault. I didn't mean to tell you my life story. Nah, it's fine. My past wasn't much cheerier after." "After?" Naruto blinked. "Come on now, I told you mine, you tell me yours." Surprisingly, she shook her head. "Tell you what, you win this war, and I'll tell you." Naruto scoffed. "Tease." But then his gaze turned somber. Humanity always seems to engage in senseless battles. Realizing the mood had veered into the morose, the huntress frowned. Smirking, she elbowed him in the ribs. "Geez, how old are you? You talk like an old man." Naruto took the bait like an elephant carp, hook, line, and sinker. "Couple thousand years, give or take." One didn't need eyes in the back of their head to see June's gobsmacked expression. That aside, why should I stick around anyway? What's in it for me? Nyla's weight in gold? He offered. "Deal," she exclaimed quite excitedly, eyes shining with avarice. "I could buy a small island with that. After you swear undying loyalty to me." "Not that oath business again." Just like that, she drew back, disgust marring her beautiful face. "I already told you, lover boy, I owe allegiance to no one but myself. If you want me to hunt someone down for you, then that's fine, but don't expect me to swear fealty to you." It was a shame, really, Naruto thought to himself. She was as lovely as Anko, and perhaps even more skilled than Shizen. But she had stubbornness of Tsunade. Once her mind was made up, only an earthshaking even could change it. He could make her do it, of that much Naruto was certain, but he wasn't the type to warp someone's mind against their will. He had had some morals, after all. Then the chains stay on. Pooh. Pooh. They continued on like that in silence, and for once there was a strange comfort in it. June was witty, he'd found, likable even, for an enemy. Almost enough to make him forget about his duty here, and his penultimate mission to Ba Sing Se. Almost, but not quite. All the while Nyla had been moving, weaving her way through the crowded streets as per her master's instructions. Naruto needn't look to know where he was going, he had already been here before, long ago. "Ah," he smiled, slowing the Shirshu with another nudge. "Here we are." If jailing wasn't impressive, then the Beifong estate certainly was. A sprawling compound emblazoned with the insignia of the flying boar and high, rising walls, it was truly the gem of jailing. Featuring a sprawling carpet of grass and a small bridge leading over it, complete with a pool for fish and guards by which to protect the family's significant investments and other assets. Just as Naruto remembered it. It was though the moment had been frozen in time since he'd last ventured to these grounds, though admittedly last time his purpose had been far less benign. Today, however, he was simply here to cash in on a favor and secure some funds for his journey. They owed him much more than that, after all. "Aren't you worried about your other friends?"
June asked as they dismounted. You know, the ones you told me you were traveling with. Nah. Naruto laughed. By now they should have reached their destination and been on their way.
Besides, if remember the Beifong family, they were always a little stuck up. They wouldn't have taken kindly to guests in their compound.
Favor or no, they probably won't be willing to let even me in through the front door unless they know who I am, you know? Now see mir.
June bristled slightly as he pressed a hand to her bare shoulder, a startling gesture of tenderness.
When his palm came away, she found a strange seal overlaying her already tattooed arm, a strange symbol that she couldn't decipher. I've marked you now. Naruto warned.
I'm going to unlock your shackles, so just stick close to me.
Try to run away and I'll know it.
June paled slightly, squirming in her chains.
I'll just take your word for it then.
Something occurred to her, at that very moment.
Wait a minute, if they're not going to let you in the front door, then what are you doing? This. Geronimo. Eep.
With a wild whoop, he vaulted over the wall and alighted effortlessly on the other side. When no guards came to greet him, he frowned.
Odd.
He'd done this deliberately to gain their attention, if not remind the Beifongs just why he was to be feared and respected.
But if they didn't want to play ball. Alright then, now all I have to do is ow.
Naruto grunted, as the earth violently upheaved beneath his feet, steadying himself only through chakra. That just made it all the more painful when sharp shards of rock flew into his unprotected face. Frowning, he swung about, glowering at the party who'd pelted him with those rock. She was a slim, waifish thing in a white kimono, long dark, ebony hair framing a heart-shaped face from which milky white eyes shone. Those blank and unseeing eyes regarding him with frightening intelligence. Even as he shifted a millimeter aside, he felt that gaze following him.
Tracking him.
She couldn't have been more than 16 years old, and yet she completely dominated him with her presence.
She couldn't see.
Yes, her feet were bare.
How in the world was she?
Oh, that was bloody brilliant. Naruto frowned a mere moment longer before it came to him, a smile all but overtaking his visage. She saw through the earth. With her feet, and the vibrations she sensed from them. It was like a reverse Byakugan of sorts.
Fascinating. What are you doing in my yard, blockhead?
The voice that emerged from that desert flower was rough and annoyed.
He almost grinned at it. It is common courtesy for a lady to give her name first, isn't it? Tough. She all but spat back. Of the Beifong family. Happy?
Now tell me who you are before I call the guards.
Oh, please do. Naruto beckoned. Guards. She cried, feigning sudden weakness. Guards. Come quick.
If she expected him to run, she'd be disappointed. Scarce had they appeared than he struck.
Bang.
Naruto's fist suddenly crashed down in front of him, the clenched knuckles creating a spider web of fissures in the earth below, their cracks scrawling toward her unaware protectors. June looked over at him and started in disbelief at what she found there, the shinobi having donned an almost feral expression as he exerted his newfound dominance over the earth. Toph narrowed her eyes, and opened her mouth to utter a warning.
Too late, the earth sucked the guardsmen down into the muck, burying them to their necks in an avalanche of terra firma.
Naruto straightened from his crouch, smirking.
Wow. I forgot bending felt that good.
Toph's fists clenched until they were white-knuckled at the edges, hoping that her visage didn't reflect the shock that she truly felt. Naruto stood stone-still as he returned that unseeing glare. Himself had very little desire to fight an earth-bending master head-on. Clearly this was one where others could see, but he wasn't about to stand by and do nothing when faced with such a prodigy. Despite all these carefully laid plans, he very much wanted to see what she could do. At last, Toph spoke again.
Not bad. She admitted. You've got some good moves. Naruto brushed off the praise like water off a duck's back. Is that why you're shaking like a leaf? Leave before I punch you across the yard. Yup, definitely a temper. Spunky little thing. June murmured. Naruto laughed. Isn't she? Oh, this'll be fun. Allow me to introduce myself. Uzumaki Naruto. He gave an exaggerate bow. Avatar of the gods, at your service. Avatar. Before Toph could finish her reply, Naruto lowered his foot and stomped down hard. Even as the Beifong heir made to make good on her threat to launch him out of her yard, she found a pillar of earth slamming her backwards into the nearest wall. Naruto watched his handiwork a moment longer before stomping again, causing his technique to crumble apart. His brief time within Azula's body had given him a basic concept of chi, enough to duplicate it to a rudimentary form with his own chakra. Regardless, the look on her face has been all too worth it. Definitely worth the detour. You're not the only one who can mess with the elements, girly oof. The air rushed out of him in a mighty whoosh as a boulder burst from the backyard and bowled him head over heel. Despite himself, Naruto chuckled. It seemed Toph wasn't as frail as he'd first thought. Grimacing, he stomped again, steadying himself in the earth. Even as Toph made to strike again, he jumped, denying her the vibrations she relied upon to predict his movements. This time when the boulder was flung, he caught it in hand and molded it to his arm, encasing it in a sheath of solid stone. Then, twisting the air around him, he shot forward like an arrow loosed from a bow, fist first. The result was nothing short of spectacular. Somehow Toph heard him coming and bent the earth into a wall around her for protection, but that did her little good. Naruto smashed through her defenses as though they were made of brittle bamboo, a heavenly javelin flung by Zeus himself. Impossibly, Toph shifted aside yet again at the last instant, her right sleeve disintegrating at his passing, leaving him to smash another crater into the earth only inches from where she'd been standing. June gawped. This guy. Not bad. Naruto grinned. I held back a little at the end, and you were still able to dodge. Her response was another boulder, to which he answered with one of his own. Visualize, then attack. Very nice. Alright blockhead, Toph growled, you're starting to get on my nerves. She moved and Naruto moved with her, no longer calling upon his chi but his chakra. Earth rose and shifted around them in folds and spears and waves, clashing against one another, taking every shape imaginable. And all the while, June sat on the sidelines watching with keen interest. Well now. This was going to be interesting. Lao Beifong and Papi Beifong started in their bed as a violent tremor rocked the mansion to its very foundations. It felt like an earthquake, yet it had all the makings of an explosion, smelling of sulfur. Whatever it was enough to send them stumbling out into the hall. A harried-looking servant rushed inside, his hair scorched and singed. Excuse me, sir, he stammered out, but you have a visitor. Lao frowned at this. Who thinks they are so important they can just barge into my home unannounced at this hour? Only one man had ever dared to do such a thing to his family in the past, a man who was long dead. A horrible demon of whom his grandfather had spoken of with fear and trepidation. A veritable juggernaut of unholy destruction, that man was both responsible for the Beifong family's success so long ago, as much as he was for its continued existence. They owed many favors to that man. Were it not for him, the Beifong family might not exist to this day. But that man was the devil himself, a being capable of unquantified levels of destruction. No, whomever this was, it certainly couldn't be. The servant squirmed. He claims to be the avatar of the gods, sir. He's with your daughter right now, earthbending as we speak. Lao's face turned ashen. Send him in. Right away. Many miles away. Admiral Zhao was dead. Word of his death had spread through the Fire Nation like wildfire, no pun intended, reaching not only the ears of Fire Lord Ozai, but all those who served under him. This was such a man. Vice Admiral Li considered himself a humble sort of man. He was content to serve as Fire Lord and by definition and not one to seek glory or fame.
Only 23 years of age, he had worked and fought and done his utmost to climb his way up through ranks, not riding upon his father's coattails, but through hard work and determination. He'd always been considered off for a commander, not the sort to abuse his rank and power or privilege. He was a family man, happily married with a child on the way, not the sort to take vengeance on his enemies. Until now. At least he had been, until he learned of his progenitor's death at the hands of the Avatar. Family was all that had ever mattered to him. And now his father was dead. The man who had single-handedly raised him, gone into oblivion, sent there by an enemy who by all rights shouldn't exist. Days had passed since he'd learnt of this tragedy, weeks since he sent out the scouts. The Avatar himself had yet to make an appearance, but for all intents and purposes, his bison had been spotted heading north. There was only one destination in that direction. And it would require preparation. Perseverance. But it would be done. Family was, after all, everything. Send for my generals. He commanded to his aide. We make for the North Pole by the month's end. Chapter 10, Gods and Monsters. Wow, it's been a while since I wrote in this thing. Turns out the Beifong family owing me a couple favors paid off. In spades. Not only did Toph's parents pay to supply and equip me, but gave me their daughter as well. Kinda awkward, that. I didn't come here to take her from them, but in its own way it works for me. The girl's an earthbending prodigy. Blind as a bat, yet, she could probably kick my ass 7 ways to Sunday when it came down to sheer bending. The only problem is her attitude. She's stubborn as hell. Just like June. Maybe that's why they're getting along so well. But I digress. Toph was more than willing to go. She's quite the little spitfire. A perfect teacher for Aang, when I get around to it. Since then, we've been stirring up all kinds of trouble in the Earth Kingdom, readying them all for a war I'm not entirely sure they want. But it's either this, or oblivion. And I will not have this country suffer the same fate as mine. I will not. I've put too much work into this, to let it stumble at the final hurdle. If that means I have to be seen as a monster by the rest of the world, then so be it. Our destination, Ba Sing Se, is nearly upon us now, and on our journey to the Great Walled City, I've tried to muster up as much support as possible. So far, so good. It seems to be working. These people, they don't care which avatar I am anymore. Every town we've passed has already taken up arms against the Fire Nation, yet they still go out of their way to help us. My presence here seems to have given them a shot in the arm, of the one thing they've never truly had for the last 100 years. Hope. To them I'm a god, to others, a monster. I've heard rumblings from the Fire Nation, they know what we're up to out here. But it's more than that. Rumor has it that they've sent a fleet to the North Pole. Commanded by Zhao's son, of all people. Hopefully Aang can hold out until I finish up here. Azula's fed me regular reports. Aside from a few unscheduled stops, they've made remarkably good time. They know what they'll be facing up in the north. Still, I can only pray that the fates are kind to them. I need to get back there. Soon. Truthfully, I hadn't expected it to be take this long. It's been weeks. But I'm nearly there now. Nearly finished. Once I've convinced the Earth King of the threat and the need for action, we're going to be in for the fight of our lives. That's right, the climax is rapidly drawing near, soon it'll be curtain call. Until then, I can't afford to rest. I'll sleep when I'm dead. By the log, I've got a lot of work to do. You're insane. You know that, right? Completely insane. Perhaps. Naruto replied to June, grimacing slightly as he stared up at the giant stone barring their path. But hey, I've done worse than this. Ba Sing Se truly lived up to her reputation as the walled city. This massive expanse of stony earth stretched for miles in either direction. For a non-bender, this would have presented quite the conundrum. But for a pair of earthbenders? No problem. It would be child's play to just smash his way through, but no, this required a more subtle touch.
For now. Toph? He turned, regarding the newest member of their little group. Mind lending me a hand with this? Sure thing, blockhead.
The teenager grumbled, stepping up beside him, arms already raised. Physically she'd changed little since leaving her home besides cuting her flowing tresses. Unless one counted the white and green tunic of which she seemed so fond. And then there was the matter of her attitude. Only a few weeks together and she was already like a sister or sorts to him, but more than that, she was family. Just like June. It was strange really, he seemed to pick up misfits wherever he went. And go. As one they moved, lifting the earth beneath their feet into a makeshift wedge. Another gestured sent that wedge shooting upward against the face of the wall. Their arms worked together in twine and tandem, hoisting them higher in slow and practiced movements. This close to the wall, he could see every crack, every stone that had been laid. This city had been here at the birth of bending, and it would likely be here for many more a year still, long after the culture that gave birth to it died out. Of course, not all were appreciative of this man-made marvel. Nyla whimpered restlessly behind them, the Shirshu drooping to cover her snout with both paws. I'm guessing she doesn't like heights. Naruto called over the roar of the rising sled. What was your first guess? June quipped. Then she'll love it when we start flying. What? Whatever answer he might have given was slain in relatively short order. They crested the wall and reached the top of the Great Barrier. Wow. The sight within was breathtaking in every sense of the word, not just those beautiful fields and the pristine landscape, but the cityscape beyond it, a sea of urban sprawl that somehow managed to appear both man-made and remain at one with the environment at the same time. From this old and time-worn vantage point, he could even see the lower, middle and upper ring standing. He hadn't had the chance to do anything about it during his last visit, thanks to the war. Perhaps it was time he changed that. Isn't it beautiful? Toph shrugged. You've seen nothing once, you've seen it a dozen times. You know, my offer still stands. She turned slightly as Naruto's voice resounded in her ears. I can give you back your sight if you just let me. Just hearing it aloud was enough to make her heart leap. She'd been blind since birth, that had been her world. A sightless, dark void. She saw with earthbending, but even then, it wasn't true sight. She had no idea what Naruto or June, or even Nyla looked like. When he'd offered to restore her sight a week ago, she'd thought he'd been joking. But still he persisted. What if he really could restore her sight? And if so, did she really want him to? Toph? I'm still thinking about it. Suit yourself. Naruto answered, anchoring their rock ledge to the wall. June sighed. My lady. He took her hand and helped her across. Hey, I could have done that myself. She said with mild venom, retracting her palm as she stepped over the ledge to safety. The last thing she wanted was anyone taking pity on her. Even the Avatar. Nevertheless, a tiny part of her delighted in knowing that she had the man's eye. Neither of them had acted on it as of yet, but still, the attraction was there. Funny, that the only man to ever elude her was now the apple of her eye. And she had a fair bit of competition, if his words were to be believed. June was almost certain that the gods were laughing at her. I know, he replied, stepping aside to let Toph by, but I wanted to help. June's smoldering gaze lingered on him for a moment before she brushed past. So now what? Toph asked. I take it you have a plan, dragging us all the way out here? The blonde cracked a grin. It doesn't matter if the burden is heavy, only that you carry it. Okay, now you've lost me. Toph. The last shinobi laughed softly and perhaps just a little forlornly. The sound was like a slow-moving thunderstorm. It means that sometimes you have to do what is necessary to protect those under your care. June and Toph colored slightly at those words. In this case, the world itself is under my care. And I have neither the time nor the patience to deal with the endless politicking and backdoor deals that surround this city. My sources tell me that a man known as Longphone controls this city. He and the daily, that is, the so-called cultural authority here, have this city in their grip.
We're going to break that grip. Nice speech.
June frowned, pausing as she stroked at Nyla's coat.
But just how do you intend to do that?
By invading the palace, of course.
Of course.
The huntress facepalmed. Toph, on the contrary, was all for it. She liked the idea of spitting in the face of authority. She'd been trapped under that same authority for the last 16 years of her life. The chance to do that to a king, well, suffice it to say she was more than eager to get her hands dirty.
All right, great. So why don't you just glow it up and get us there?
Naruto felt his left eye twitch at the mention of his avatar state.
Because Toph, we're saving that kind of shock and awe tactic for the palace. If this place is anything like I remember before the war, then we might not get a warm welcome after all these years. They'll probably try to bog us down in the bureaucratic bullshit. It's called being handled. She mumbled. And they are going to fail horribly at it. Came the answer. Why, you ask? Because they're about to have problems of their own.
His eyes began to shimmer.
I'm setting this city free.
June froze.
Wait a second. You're not going to. I am.
Both girls flinched as a terrible cracking sound pervaded the air.
It was his skin. Blue eyes darkened. In a single breath he exhaled and dropped sage mode.
Serene saffron eyes flashed into violent violet, the rimmed orbs narrow and intense, shimmering with untold energy. Growling, he took it further, his body stepping out of itself, skin shimmering in eerie onyx as he ascended into the towering terror that was his avatar state.
Now, then. 6 arms folded across and before his chiseled chest, a small cloud of steam wafting up and out between his clenched teeth. Let us begin.
Raising his arms, the avatar of the gods stretched out his senses into the city and let go of himself. Momentarily, he ceased to be as a person.
As an individual.
His consciousness left his body and flooded the minds of every man, woman and child in the lower ring.
He saw what they saw. Felt what they felt. The hopelessness. Despair. Oppression. Fear.
In his mind he pictured the walls, the 3 rings that divided the city and all the culture within.
It lasted for less than 1/10 of a second, but it was enough.
In a blink he'd left them, turning his all-seeing gaze onto the denizens of the middle ring. These folks were slightly better off than the peasants. They didn't live in their own filth, and their food was not rotten. And yet it was the same set of emotions he found within, a longing for a better life.
Free of the stagnant culture that crushed them down and ground them underfoot.
This was a city oppressed, one who knew the war raged a few yards outside their walls, yet pretended it didn't exist. Again, he left them, this time taking root in those of the upper ring. These folk were the entitled and the unprivileged, those who lived lives of luxury, servants, slaves attending to their every whim. They had women and men to satisfy their every carnal desire, some little more than children. Murders had been committed here, crimes swept underfoot so someone could clamber higher up the ladder that was prestige and power. They were proud of their status and cared not what happened to those considered beneath them. All who dwelled in this ring, save perhaps the king himself, thought themselves untouchable in the safety of their walls.
Disgusting creatures.
Not worthy of redemption, these ones. Drawing strength from these experiences, from everything he'd seen, Naruto reached down into the walls with only his mind. Then he brought them down. A deafening thump of a sound reached their ears as the 3 walls collapsed like a house of cards, falling inward on themselves as though crushed by the hand of an angry god. And, in a sense, they had been. With just a thought, he had separated the walls that so divided their cultures. There was a moment of silence between the unlikely trio as those words sank in, as they watched the 3 rings crumble away. Then, Toph grinned as she realized the implications.
That was, you. It's not something I'd care to do again. Naruto answered, his ebon skin slowly fading back a healthy tan. I freaking love you. A laugh tore itself out of his throat. Now comes the fun part. Mere minutes later. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening.
Longfen was a tactical genius, a mastermind that would put the best strategists of the world to shame. He had schemed and connived and plotted to reach the position he was in now. To have the king reduced to mere figurehead status, while he commanded the true power of the city. But nothing could have prepared him for this. The walls were gone. Rioting in the streets. All his careful planning had been for naught. One man had made that so. Naruto cocked his head aside, a small smile plucking at his whiskered visage. It was, Longfen thought, quite disconcerting. He'd been unnerved to find that the Avatar had made an unscheduled stop to Ba Sing Se as it was, but the broken bodies of the Daily surrounding him was enough to make his hair stand on end. He had made no demands. Offered no word, nor talk of parley. He'd simply flown into the city with those two women and stormed the palace on his own. And when the guards had tried to stop him. The Avatar of the gods nudged one of the bodies aside, a scowl affixed to his face.
I am disappointed in you, little man. When he spoke he did so slowly, those blue eyes narrow and hard. I was of the understanding that the entire world knew of this war. And yet I find you wallowing in ignorance and illusion, a grand conspiracy perpetuated by the son of a merchant who lusted for power. What do you think of that, Toph? He turned slowly, those eerie orbs regarding the younger of the two women at his side. Those white, milky eyes snapped toward him, filled with anger. I think he deserves a taste of his own medicine. Wait. Naruto raised a hand, stalling her. Was he showing mercy? A cold sweat began to trickle down Fang's neck. My Lord Avatar, he began, voice breaking, please understand. In silencing talk of conflict, Ba Sing Se remains a peaceful, orderly utopia, the last one on earth. I know a thing or two about Uptopia. The blonde replied quietly, feeling his lips curl in disdain. It never lasts. No, I came here to get an army, and an army is what I'll get. Preferably without you. Now, I will speak with your king, and then I will be gone from here. But you. Impossibly, his grin grew. I wasn't asking, little man. I'm afraid I can't allow that to happen. Longfen frowned. You see, I find it best to always be prepared and have reinforcements. Crap. Toph swore. And the earth erupted around them. Naruto's only response was to close his eyes as dozens of Daily agents dropped from the ceiling, rose from the floor, appeared from seemingly nowhere. An admirable effort. But paltry before the wrath of a god. Then I do hope you've brought more than a dozen men. You see, for all your wit, you failed to realize something. I'm not trapped in this palace with you, you're trapped in here with me. Yes, a fine speech. Longfen scoffed. Daily, arrest the Avatar and his friends. This instant. Nothing happened. A frown pulled at his mustache. I said, arrest them. Still no response. Scowling, he whirled on his men, baffled to find them standing ramrod straight, still staring ahead. What's the matter with you? Naruto laughed and stepped forward. No one made a move to stop him. It's because they haven't made up their minds. He raised a hand lazily, tiny blue embers splaying from his fingertips. They're waiting to see how this is going to end. I can see your whole history in your eyes. You were born with nothing, so you had to struggle, and connive, and claw your way to power. His entire body seemed to shimmer from within as he spoke, lit in eerie black, the pulses resonating with Longfeng's own hammering heartbeat. But true power, the divine right to rule, is something that you're born with. You don't earn it. I've come to see that. And you don't have it. Fact is, they don't know which one of us will be standing and which one will be bowing down once this is over. But I know. And you know. Smiling, he curled those fingers into a fist. Well. Sweat beaded down Longfeng's face.
He couldn't bring himself to speak. The sheer malice in those eyes, the pure power resonating within them, it stilled him. He could barely bring himself to breathe, let alone raise a hand against the shimmering specter. I surrender. He dropped to a knee. You've beaten me at my own game. Naruto's mouth curved in a cruel sneer. Sorry. I'm not taking prisoners today. With a snarl he stomped down and latched onto the earth, molding it to his will. Then he pushed deeper. Grabbed the magma beneath and brought it roaring to the surface. Long Feng barely saw it before the white-hot wave roared over him, his bones, his body melting almost instantaneously. There was no pain. No scream. One moment he existed, the next he was buried beneath a sea of smoldering lava. Within the span of 2 beats, not even his bones remained. The great mastermind behind the conspiracy that had controlled the city for so many years was suddenly no more. As if he'd never been. Now then, Naruto turned to address the remaining daily, their faces frozen in white stone, pale and drawn at the death of their commander. Are you going to serve me? That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.